perspective on failure. Have you ever failed at something before, Bay? Anything. Failed a test in school, failed at a relationship, failed in your finances. Have you ever failed at something? I mean, for not for nothing, failed on a business, right? We talk a lot about business on this channel, or even fail at creating content. I used to talk to you guys about creating content. We have plenty of those videos. Check out the rest of my playlist. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the perspective on failure, period. It doesn't matter what the topic is, it doesn't matter the thing that you failed at, it's all the same. Failure, just like anything else, is a mindset. But first, let's go ahead and define what failure actually means. Okay, so failure is looked at as lack of success. Failure is defined as non-performance in an action. And then failure is looked at as a breakdown in function. Okay, so we'll leave it at those three. Failure is often defined as a lack of success, non-performance at a thing, and breakdown in function. So we're going to talk about each one of these things since that's probably the most common of the way that people look at failure is as one of these three things. Let's talk about lack of success real quick because obviously success is the opposite of failure, okay? Now, lack. There's one principle that exists within the universe that we're going to bring into this conversation, and then we're going to deep dive into it a little bit later, and that is the law of attraction. Many of you have heard of this law. We're going to talk about it in a few. But I want to remind you of this one image that I draw very often, every time we come to these conversations and this content, that I need you to remember is that everything has two sides, just like a battery. And on each side, there's going to be a positive and then a negative. And even though that's the case, really, really take this in for a moment. Because when you think of a battery that has two opposite ends, and so does the device that you're placing the battery into, in order for it to function, we need the battery to actually have these two opposite ends, right? That device also, when you're placing the batteries inside of the device, it is very clear. There's always instructions about the way that you need to place this battery inside of the device in order for it to work. Without that, it does not function. And life is the same way. So when we think about this battery and we think about success, where would success be? Success will obviously be on the positive end, right? Success we look at as a positive experience. Where would lack be? On the opposite end, right? And so the opposite of success oftentimes is defined as failure. And guess what? Life has both success and failure a part of our experiences, and we need to experience both of these things in order to function properly in this world. Believe it or not. And so it's really important that we take a moment to soak this in because I want you to think about the first time to which you might have experienced or at least became aware that you failed at something. And the reason why I want you to think about this for a moment is because this very moment defined several experiences that you've had around failure thereafter, even the way that you're thinking of failure right now. If you look at the word failure or you even think about the word failure, what does it do to you inside? What is the vibration that it brings to you internally? If it's something negative, meaning that it does not feel good, that is why we're having this very conversation today, is to shift our perspective because we are now aware and know that we absolutely need both ends of these spectrums in order to work, in order to function properly and at the most optimal potential. Okay? We need both. So I want you to take a moment to think of that very first time that you acknowledge that you failed at something. I could think of several for myself. Okay? Riding a bike or rollerblading for the first time, I remember very vividly, even though memories sometimes can fail us. But that's a conversation for another day. But I do remember very vividly the first time I fell off my bike. I remember the first time I fell while rollerblading down the block. And now this one was actually bigger than the bike one for me because with the bike I had elbow pads and knee pads on, helmet, all that good stuff. But with rollerblading, I did not have my knee pads on. And I remember when I tripped over the corner of my neighbor's front lawn and fell in my driveway, and I looked at my knee and saw flesh for the first time. Never knew flesh was white. And then blood rushed over and covered that flesh, and I was like, wow, okay. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't look good. This hurts. There's pain. Now I'm crying. I know this is not a good thing. I have failed at successfully rollerblading in this very moment past this portion of my house, right? So that I remembered as being painful. Another time that I could think about failing in a moment is math. I failed math very frequently in school. This was one of the most challenging topics for me, okay? And every time I failed math, I remember seeing a very large F at the top of the page, and then the teacher would write a note. And then when I would come home with this F on this paper and show my parents, I would get in trouble. So I now associated this letter, even the color red, taking a test in class, having notes on that paper, I all associated this thing with a bad experience. Therefore, what was my response? My response was to avoid getting an F at all costs. But what happens when you try to avoid anything? This is where the conversation around law of attraction comes in. Because anything that you try to avoid, you attract. Sometimes it's so funny, on the contrary, anything that you strongly desire, you repel. And it's interesting because, again, we talk about this battery and how this works. If you put this battery in on the wrong ends of the spectrum inside of the device, it will not function properly. The positive end needs to go into the negative side of the device, and the negative end needs to go into the positive side of the device. And that is the same way that life works. So as you try to avoid this action, you successfully bring it into your experience. So as many times as I tried to avoid F's in my math class or my math test, I brought home more. So much so that even when my teachers and my parents tried to help me, I remember my mom hired a math tutor, and he would come to the house and he would try to help me with my math homework and my math problems. And to no avail did I get any better at math, because even in the very moment that man was sitting next to me in the chair and explaining the math problems to me, it didn't matter that he was kind, that he was polite, that he was patient. I was shaking in my seat simply because this was all I could think about. All I could think about is I'm not good at math. I'm not good at solving problems. I'm in trouble. And so my mom had to bring in this extra help, right? But it didn't even come to me that it was helpful. All it meant to me was that I wasn't worthy or deserving of anything other than this. And that happens to many people and in many different ways. I'm talking about my math experience, but that happens to us in anything in which we receive F's, where we feel like we failed. Now, it took me more than a couple of decades to finally figure out how to turn my F's into A's in math class. So I went on a very long journey in school, failing math or barely passing math, I mean, I remember getting really great grades in other subjects, even all through high school. And with math, it would, if it wasn't an F, it was close to it, right? It was a D or C. And we don't even know. Like, teachers might have just been being gracious. It could have very well just been that F, right? We know how that goes in this country. But when I got to college, this is what happens in college, okay? They're not as gracious as those high school and elementary teachers. You actually need to pass this class, and you need to pass it with a specific grade so that you can graduate with a certain honors, or that your GPA is a certain, like, all of these things were looked at in terms of how you would get a job, which is the whole reason for going to college, right? Is to study something in depth so that you can apply it after school. And so I realized, like, oh, if I get a D in math, it doesn't even matter that I got an A in the rest of these classes, because it's going to bring down my GPA drastically, right? So that was a focal point. Still focused on the negative end, though. I need to avoid getting a D now. I need to avoid getting C's. I need to avoid getting F's. And then, y'all, I had to take calculus 3 times, mind you. I took calculus 3 times. The first 2 times wasn't a good look, let's just say that. First time I failed, second time I had to drop out of that class. My father got sick. And then the third time had to be the charm, because there was no way that I was going to continue to keep taking this class over and over, especially because it was just a prerequisite for my major. But remember, I didn't only want to not get an F, I also didn't want to get this D and the C. I wanted to get either an A or a B. And so I needed to focus there. Now, understanding the shift, I also needed to shift my habits and action. So not just the mindset. I didn't know anything about law of attraction at this point to be like, oh, Shay, you need to shift your perspective or anything of that nature. I'm talking to you about this now because I'm very clear, hindsight 2020. But at this point in time, I at least recognize that I want to, or I need to, get one of these 2 letters. So instead of thinking about how I can avoid this, I started to just focus here. I need to get an A. Then that felt very far-fetched at that point. But I think I could do a B. I think I'm capable of achieving a B in math class, okay? So how am I going to do that? Well, thankfully, after not passing calculus the second time, I got really good advice from the professor, which he told me, why didn't you say anything to me earlier when you were experiencing issues? Okay, so at this time my dad was sick and I didn't tell my professor. I was still going to school, but I obviously had a lot on my mind and a lot on my heart. And so that all contributed to me failing math on top of the mindset that I already had about math, right? And those words, though, that he said, I wasn't even aware that I should partner with my professors. Like, that wasn't even a thing for me, right? Mind you, it's because I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm trying to avoid all things around this topic, okay? So once he said that to me, I felt his genuineness. I realized that, okay, I need to partner with my professors. If I do that, they'll at least see my effort. If not, they'll be the ones that'll continue to assist me through this process. That was one of the actions that I decided to take, okay? So I partnered with my professor based on the topic of math. I partnered with my professor. Okay, he became my math partner. And here's a couple of other things that I realized. I don't do well in large classes, okay? At the time, that's what I believed about myself. And so I realized that in these really large settings, what I ended up doing was sitting in the back of the class. And so there's 2 other things that I ended up doing aside from partnering with my professor. I came into a small class on Sundays, and sat in front of the class. 3 things that I changed, 3 actions that I changed in order to support my new mindset. Partner with my professor. Naturally, the class was smaller because it was a Sunday. Sundays, a lot of people don't take class or go to school, but they offer Sunday classes. But the classroom size is much smaller because people don't go on Sundays. And so there was only a few people in the class. This also allowed me to sit in front of the class because there was more seats, and so it didn't matter what time I got to the class, honestly. Like, it did matter, but it didn't matter any time that I got to the class. In the beginning, I was able to find a seat in the front. These 3 things all supported my new mindset. And so what happened at the end of the semester, what I found is that the final grade that I got on this math class, drum roll please. Dun, dun, dun. I got an A- in that class, right between an A and a B, and I'll take it because I deserve that. I worked my butt off, but I can say that these things definitely helped. Me partnering with my professor, asking questions with things that I didn't understand, me going to school on a Sunday and utilizing that small classroom setting, and then even after class, studying and doing my homework right away, right? Doing homework right away on a Sunday while it was slow, while it was quiet in school, and then also sitting in the front of the class where it was very unlikely for me to fall asleep or to start doodling on my book or to pay attention to my phone because I'm closer to the professor. So I wouldn't be doing those things right in front of him. That's OD. So those 3 things got me here on top of the mindset shift, okay? So that's really important. I need you to recognize that success and failure lives on the same line, okay? They both help our lives to function properly. It's just about our perspective and the way that we're looking at things. Wherever you place your focus is where your attention is going to go. It doesn't matter whether you're avoiding it. Obviously, no one is saying, I want to fail, I want to fail, I want to fail, right? And even if that's the case, on the contrary, you might get the opposite outcome, right? Because it's all about where you're placing your attention. Where you place your attention is what you attract. So it's really important that you don't focus on failure if you actually want to experience success. So lack of success is simply a mind state. It's a mindset. Okay? It doesn't actually mean you failed. I'm going to explain exactly to you what failure means by the end of this video. But in the meantime, while I clean this board, be sure to like this content if you just picked up that first gem. I want you to also think about where are you failing right now, or something that you're failing at, or better, something that you want to be really good at, something that you want to succeed at, and what do you need in order to make that happen. I'll bring all of this stuff back in if I need it. Hope you're taking some notes because I got to clean this board as we go along. Bam. So, next. Now that we spoke about lack of success and it just being the opposite end of where we're placing our attention. Lack and success is on the same spectrum. Lack of success is equivalent to failure. Okay? It's the same thing. So we just need to place our attention here. Now let's talk about non-performance. This is very simple. We fail when we don't even try. This is non-performance of an action. If you don't even make the effort, of course you're going to fail, right? If you don't take any effort at all or place any action or intention into something, then it's an automatic failure. That's like signing up for a class and not attending. You get an F, right? If you sign up to anything and you don't attend, you get an F, okay? That's it. It's an automatic failure. That one's pretty simple. We're not going to spend much time on that. Non-performance means you didn't even do anything, or you didn't put as much effort into it as you possibly could. Now, something to know is that about this, something to know about non-performance, is that still today in this country, the number one regret in life for our elders and those who are on their deathbed, when they are asked what their number one regret in life is not trying and or you liking your bone, pup? You love your bone. Taking more risk. To this day, number one regret for our elders and then for those who are on their deathbed is not trying and taking more risks. That's non-performance, right? So if you didn't try harder to pass at something that was important to you, if you didn't try harder in your relationships, right? If you never actually did a thing even though you really wanted to do it, if you spent all of your life working a job that if you had a choice, you would have been doing something else, that you did not take enough risk. And now, at the last few days of your life, you can't do it because it's essentially too late, right? That's non-performance, y'all. So we don't want you to end up here. Lord knows that I no longer want to be there. I'm taking a lot more risk than I have in my entire life. And I have to say, this has helped me a lot. Once I've heard that, I was like, oh, that's what they said? Like, it didn't dawn on me that this was actually a thing for people. Not trying or taking more risk. Like, when you think, even when we hear this word risk, it might produce some of the same feelings as failure. This is something that you want to avoid, right? We might have been taught to avoid risk, right? But how do you know if you're even going to be successful at something if you didn't even try? Imagine if Michael Jordan never even tried to play basketball, right? Or to be, not just play basketball, become great at basketball, because Michael Jordan loved baseball. And he became great at basketball, but guess what he also did? He played baseball. Like, he took more risk. I just learned about, what's his name? This was a African American fighter, like boxer, in the 60s. Dave Chappelle just taught me about him. Me and my brother were watching the Dave Chappelle special. It's on Netflix, so you guys watch it if you're interested, and or if you like Dave Chappelle, and you'll hear about the gentleman that I'm talking about, because I cannot remember his name right now. But he really lived on chasing or pursuing his dreams no matter what. Like, he would take risk for anything that allowed him to experience pleasure, right? So not only did he have a nice car, but he had a nice fast car because he liked to drive fast, and he took trips, and he had concubines and all these things. And I'm saying all this to say is because, especially being black in the 60s, those are a lot of risky things, okay? And it didn't stop him from pursuing pleasure, because he doesn't want to end up, right, at the end of his life with any regrets. It was more important to him to take the risk and to try than to not perform at all. Okay? Even him boxing was a big deal. I read a little bit about him. Even boxing was a big deal because he wasn't boxing other black boxers. He was boxing white boxers and not Caucasian. That was even a bigger problem because he was very successful, let's say that. He's very victorious. So that posed an issue for him, whether he won or not. Okay? So that's it. We don't want to end up with any regrets because we didn't try or we didn't take more risk. Of course, when we're talking about risk, we do need to measure safety. So obviously I'm not talking about you've always wanted to jump off a building and see if you landed on your feet, please don't do that. That's not what we're talking about, so I'm not encouraging that. I am encouraging, though, that if you have been working a job that you don't love, or not even that, if you're whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter. But let's say you've always wanted to learn how to swim, you always wanted to learn how to play piano, you always wanted to roller skate, you've always wanted to practice magic. Like, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, like, if this is a genuine desire, and if you had nothing to worry about at all and nothing to do on a day-to-day basis, would you be doing this thing? You should probably risk it. Okay? Risk it for the biscuit. So that's it with the non-performance. We're already here at our final definition, and then I'm going to tell you what failure actually means in life. Not only just what it means in life, but why failure is a good thing, because we know that we need failure with success in order to operate in this world properly. Okay? So, breakdown and function. Now, we're going to keep it 100. There are some failures that we cannot bounce back from. Maybe you failed at a relationship with a person who wants nothing to do with you anymore, or they're not here physically or mentally, emotionally, doesn't matter, right? So maybe that relationship is done and gone. That happens to lots of people, right? Like, I wish if I could go back in time, I would have done things differently, right? And then there's also literal physical breakdowns in function, like if you think about heart failure. Okay? Heart failure you cannot bounce back from. Heart failure means that you no longer have any chances to even listen in on this conversation, right? Or to exchange in this conversation with me, right? So breakdown in heart function and heart failure means that you do not have any more opportunities and chances to try again. So we also want to be honest about failure. Sometimes we don't have the chance to take more risks. Sometimes we don't have the chance to bounce back. Sometimes we don't have the chance anymore to even change our mind, right? And shift our perspective so that we can do these things to get us to success. Sometimes a breakdown in function just means that is the end of the road, right? There are unfortunately plenty of athletes who who get injured and cannot come back from that injury, right? Or actors, actresses, whatever, right? Superman's name is slipping my mind right now, but that's the image that I have in my head. And Superman, unfortunately, he fell off a horse, horseback riding. He loved horseback riding, right? He was doing something he loved, fell off a horse and injured his spine, so that bound him to a wheelchair. Now, he had an entirely different experience in life because that's the route that God had for him beyond him being an actor, beyond him being Superman. He was still a great and successful individual after that incident, so don't want that to be all doom and gloom. Like, we gotta understand, y'all, that there is more to life than what we just plan and expect, right? We have this expectation to succeed at something, and then if it doesn't go our way the first time, then it's like all hell breaks loose. Or if we have a complete breakdown in function, then it's like all hell breaks loose. And that is not the case. There are so many different areas and aspects of our lives to which we get to be successful at. It's never just the one thing. The only reason why this feels so great is because of the great emotions that lives within us about that thing. That is it, right? So I love one of these analogies that Abraham Hicks, who was one of my virtual mentors that helped me in understanding how to shift perspective. She would say, if someone called you that was a random stranger, you pick up the phone and they say, hello, you don't know me, but I'll never call you again. And you say, okay, click, and you hang up, right? And it's all good. And I went like this, so you know how old I am, right? When you hang up like this and not like this. Okay, so there's one, but then if your parents called you and did that, or your siblings called you and did that, your cousin, your best friend called you and said, hey, I just want to let you know that I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'll never talk to you again. You might panic a little bit, right? That might make you a little bit more anxious, or at least a little bit more inquisitive, right? Curious, like, what are you talking about? What happened, right? Tell me what happened. You want to have a conversation with this person. Why? Because you have more emotions. You have more chemistry with this person. There is experience. There's memories. There's ties, right? There's these emotional ties to these people that we create bonds with because we put more attention and intention into those relationships and experiences, right? And so that is why, you know, those things matter, but things that strangers or things that seem far away and distant, it wouldn't matter as much, okay? Because we don't have as much emotional investment. The things that we have more emotional investment into feels more like the way that we probably originally looked at this word or experienced this world in the first half of our lives, maybe even up until this conversation today. But I want to let you know that it doesn't have to be there, because if you're watching this or you're listening to the sound of my voice, you still have a chance. You still have the opportunity to shift your mindset and to leverage failure, understanding that we absolutely need failure in order to operate in this world successfully anyway. We need both, positive and negative. And so, now that we have the full function of failure, let's define what failure actually is. Remember to subscribe if you're not subscribed to this channel already, to leave a comment down below of what you've taken away from this conversation. Here is what I discovered for myself of what I can look at failure as. This is how I shifted my perspective, right? Because yes, I understand the law of attraction, and I understand that attention goes to where intention flows, right? Like if that is, intention flows to where attention goes. If that is what I'm focused on, then that's what I'm going to attract. Totally get it. But that didn't necessarily stop me from focusing on something that didn't feel good, right? Because there's things that we worry about, and there's deeply rooted issues and concerns that we have and we've had in practice for a long time, right? As far as childhood. So here's what I've actually learned from Will Smith at this, okay? Will Smith is great at breaking this down. However you feel about Will Smith as I bring up that name, I want you to pay attention to the emotion that I just gave you, because that's important. Our emotions are a signal, right? They give us signals and indications about how something is impacting and affecting us. It doesn't mean that it's bad or good. It doesn't mean that it's wrong or right. So if your reaction right now is just like, Will Smith, why is she bringing him up? That's something for you to look at. Because Will Smith is he's a genius, all right? We all make mistakes, which is what failure is. Failure is a mistake or some level of expectation that we did not meet, that we failed to meet. It's a missed opportunity, all of those things that we can label it as. But here's a really easy way to shift your perspective around failure so that it starts to feel a little lighter, because that's what's important. Emotion is the glue to our desires. And if we desire to be successful, we need to stop looking at this as a bad thing, okay? Negative. Even though we can have this conversation and I'm telling you, yeah, we need positive and negative, that doesn't mean that we feel any better about negativity. And so here's some ways that I took from Will Smith of what helps you to look at failure. You can actually only fail while you're still breathing and living if you disregard these two ways of looking at your mistakes or your failures. One is if you don't learn your lesson. Y'all, after you fail and make mistakes, that means that there's a lesson to be learned. And so even as I was discussing my math class earlier, when I looked at this in hindsight and fully evaluated like what was happening with me as a child, all the way into my adulthood and college, and how I looked at math, and I would say like math is hard. I can't pass math. Math is too challenging. I'm not smart enough for math. Math is only getting harder as I continue my education, right? All of these things that I was telling myself, that was my area of focus when it came to math. It wasn't until I heard this message about failure that there is a lesson every time you make a mistake. So you need to look at your mistakes in order to get better anyway. Can you imagine if every time Kobe Bryant made a shot that he missed his shot, that he didn't take any advice from his coach or he didn't make any adjustments to get better? Obviously, you could tell I'm a sports fan, right? So, can you imagine that though? If you just keep doing the same thing and keep getting the same result and never make an adjustment. That is the definition of insanity, okay? So, we need to learn our lesson and then we need to make adjustments and apply it. So for me with math class, I already told y'all the 3 things that I changed, the actions that I changed, the approaches that I took in order to receive my passing grade, right? So the only way that we actually fail is if we don't learn our lesson. So when I think about it in hindsight, I actually remember anytime I would get an F on an exam, I'd quickly put the paper away. Like I didn't want to look at anything else, especially if the teacher wrote something on there that made the original feeling of this even worse. Like if you don't do better, then you're not gonna pass the class. Like all of these things, I was like, oh my God, they're so dreadful, right? So I would actually avoid it even further, so much so that I wouldn't even look at the questions that I got wrong, because that's how much I was trying to avoid it. That's how much that I was thinking about, man, if I bring this test home and show my mom, I'm going to get in trouble. So I didn't even want to look at it. But if I didn't look at the questions that I got wrong, how was I going to get better? You okay, Pup? You scared yourself? How would I get better if I don't even know the questions that I got wrong, right? So what typically happens in class, you take a couple quizzes and a couple tests and then you have a final. And guess what? Those same questions might come back on the final. I'm still going to get it wrong when it comes around to the final because I never went back to actually look at my mistakes. And so this is another approach that I needed to take in that class. When I got my exam back, I also needed to look at which ones that I get right. Okay, so I know I understood that. I got it or I memorized it well, whatever. Or which ones did I get and which ones did I get wrong? Okay, so this was the answer. So now I could go back to this chapter, I could reread it, fully understand it, make sure I apply it on the next exam. You need to learn the lesson. So I'm talking about math class again, but again, this happens everywhere in life. So think about your relationships that failed. Because that's a big one for people. Romance is a big one for people. By the way, it's Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, okay? I hope you love yourself. Because that's what Valentine's Day is about. Before you can love other people, you gotta love yourself. But now let's take a moment to think about your failed relationships, okay? And I've thought about mine as well. Your failed relationships, right? With people. It doesn't matter whether it was romantic, platonic, familial, okay? Any of those failed relationships, what went wrong? And if the only thing you're going to look at is what the other person did and not how you contributed to it, even though relationship is 50-50, why? Why are you responsible for owning any mistakes made in any of your failed relationships? Because in order for any relationship to function anyway, there's positive and negative. So that means that no matter how you want to look at it, whether you're the battery or they're the battery, there's still a device that battery has to go into. And every time there's a negative, there's a positive. Every time there's a positive, there's a negative. That means that you two that came together to try to make that relationship function, y'all both had a responsibility for the success or the failure of the relationship or the things inside of that relationship. So If you're not even looking at anything that you contributed to the success of that failure of that relationship, then you were just like me in my math class, just tucking away those exams, not even taking a look at what I did right and what I did wrong so that I'm able to pass the next time. So you might find yourself in multiple failed relationships over and over again, possibly just because you're not looking at what you contributed to it. And then not only just your contributions, but then what is the change? What is the change in the perspective? And then what's the change in your approach? So the actual actions that you take into the next one, right? So you should be learning lessons. Instead of being upset at the other person the whole time, or blaming the other person the whole time, or thinking that you wasted your time, how could you waste your time if you actually learned your lesson? You wouldn't waste your time, because that means that the next relationship that you have is going to be even more successful because you've learned this. That's what that means, y'all. So that you don't keep making the same mistake. Because then you end up dating the same kind of people, or you keep making the same kind of mistakes, right? Or you keep making the same contributions thinking that it's going to change because the person changed, and it's not them, it's you. You need to own that. You have to own your own mistakes, and you have to own your own lessons. That's a good thing, okay? Because once you change yourself, then everything outside of you begins to change. It always starts with internal, and then the universe, law of attraction, gives to you what you are. I hope y'all caught that. Because while you sit there talking about someone else, again, I don't care if it's family, friends, or if it was a romantic relationship, any failed attempts in those relationships, if you're not focused on what you contributed, you're going to miss your lesson. Therefore, you have to repeat it. The same way I had to repeat calculus class until I passed it, right? It's the same concept, y'all. Nothing changes. This is the way the laws operate. It doesn't matter what the topic is. This topic that we're talking about is relationships. Okay, so you end up changing the person or avoiding it altogether, only to still meet the same kind of people anyway, or to walk around with resentment and grudges against the people that actually did you a favor because they helped you learn something new. Failure is a lesson. So if you're smart, you'll learn your mistakes and you'll apply the lesson the next time. And because there's a lesson, there's automatically a blessing. Lessons are blessings. Therefore, failure is a blessing, because you get to learn something new and apply it the next time. And that's a good thing. This is positive. This doesn't always feel good, but this always feels good. We don't ever talk about blessings in a negative sense, right? You've never heard someone talk about a blessing in a negative sense. But just like this battery, a lesson might feel like the negative side. Just like that failed relationship, that failed test, the breakdown of your hoopty, your car, right? That doesn't feel good if you break down on the side of the road and then you find out that your car can't even be fixed anymore. It doesn't feel like that. But then you're never able to get that new car. And you don't know how that new car is going to come to you. I did another video about how your desires actually get to you. All you need to know is what you want and why you want it. The universe does everything else to make sure it gets to you. So all that matters is what you want and why you want it. Your blessings, what you want and why you want it, that's what matters. And the universe is going to bring it to you. So lessons don't always feel good. They're not supposed to. No one told you that. In fact, most lessons, as we have seen or experienced in our life, feels this way. It feels like the negative charge of the battery. But each time we actually learn and apply the lesson, we get a blessing. We get a blessing, which always feels good. You ain't never heard nobody talk about a blessing in an opposite, in a negative way. Even if you talk about a failed relationship could be a blessing. That means you learned your lesson. Why? Because you finally got out of something that wasn't serving you. Yes, but it's still, those nuances in the middle still matter so that you don't apply it again. You can only receive the full blessing if you receive the lesson. And with that, that is why failure is actually a positive. And so I hope that you are successful now that you fully understand what failure means. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. Congratulations to us. We made 100 subscribers. Finally, I was waiting for that to break. I was at 99 for like 2-3 months. But I appreciate y'all who are subscribed and who watches and blesses me with a thumbs up or with comments and feedback about this channel. I appreciate any comments that you leave me. Make sure you check the description box down below to see my offers. And I'll see you the same time next week, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, every weekend. Peace, y'all.